When Marcus Blackwood orchestrated his own financial downfall, he thought he was testing his young wife's loyalty. But in the glittering world of New York's elite, nothing is quite what it seems. As designer brands give way to discount tags and penthouses transform into cramped apartments, both husband and wife discover that the greatest deception might not be about money at all. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find what's real. Marcus Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing at the glittering cityscape below. At 42, he had built Blackwood Enterprises from the ground up into a billion-dollar technology empire. But lately, a gnawing doubt had been eating away at him. 3 years ago, he had married Sophia Martinez, a stunning 28-year-old art gallery curator. Their whirlwind romance had captured the attention of New York's elite social circles. The self-made tech mogul and the vivacious beauty from a middle-class background. While many whispered about their age gap and different social standings, Marcus had been certain their love was genuine. Now, as he watched his wife's Instagram stories featuring her shopping sprees at Bergdorf's and lunches at Le Bernardin with her equally wealthy friends, that certainty was beginning to crack. Sophia had grown increasingly distant over the past year, more interested in maintaining her social media presence than spending time with him. Their conversations had become superficial, centered around her next charity gala appearance, or which exclusive resort they should visit for their upcoming vacation. "Sir, your financial advisor is here for the meeting," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Marcus straightened his Italian silk tie and turned away from the window. "Send him in, Janet." Richard Chen, his longtime friend and financial advisor, entered with a concerned expression. "Marcus, are you sure about this? It's an extremely risky move." "I need to know, Richard," Marcus replied, sinking into his leather chair. "The prenup protects the company's assets, but I need to understand who I'm really married to. Is it me she loves, or the lifestyle?" Richard shook his head. "Faking bankruptcy is more than just a simple deception. We'd need to make it completely convincing. News articles, bank statements, everything. Sophia runs in sophisticated circles. They'll do their research." "Then make it bulletproof," Marcus insisted. "Use your connections in the financial press. Make it look like a massive cybersecurity breach wiped out our trading algorithms and drained our accounts. In this volatile market, it'll be believable." "And what about your employees, the shareholders?" "Only the board will know the truth, and they've agreed to keep quiet. We'll call it a stress test of our disaster protocols." Marcus pulled up a photo of Sophia on his phone. Her dazzling smile, designer dress, and perfectly manicured appearance screamed luxury. "I need to know if she'll stand by me when the mansions and sports cars are gone." Over the next few weeks, Richard and his team orchestrated an elaborate scheme. They planted stories in respected financial publications about suspicious activities in Blackwood Enterprises' trading patterns. Rumors of a devastating hack began circulating in the tech circles. Marcus's public appearances became increasingly strained, and his usual confident demeanor gave way to visible stress. Sophia noticed the changes but seemed more concerned about maintaining appearances. "Darling, the Vanderbilt's annual gala is next month. I simply must have that new Oscar de la Renta gown I showed you." Marcus forced himself to look pained. "Sophia, we need to talk. Something's happened at the company." He explained the situation, how their accounts had been drained, how the company's revolutionary trading algorithms had been stolen and corrupted, how their stock was in freefall. Sophia's perfectly shaped eyebrows knitted together as she processed the information. "But surely the insurance will cover it? Or the government? You're too big to fail, aren't you?" Her voice held more irritation than concern. "The investigation could take years," Marcus replied. "We need to make immediate changes, dramatic ones." The changes came swiftly. They put their Hampton estate on the market. Their fleet of luxury cars disappeared one by one. Marcus moved them from their Central Park penthouse to a modest 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Sophia watched in horror as their life of luxury crumbled around them. "This is temporary," she kept saying, but her Instagram posts became less frequent, her lunches with friends more sparse. Her designer wardrobe began appearing piece by piece on high-end consignment sites. Marcus observed every reaction, every complaint, every moment of adaptation or resistance. He noticed how she'd cry after phone calls with her mother, who had warned her about marrying an older man. He saw how her friends started making excuses not to meet, how the party invitations dwindled. But he also noticed unexpected things, like how Sophia had started cooking dinner instead of ordering in, terrible at first, but gradually improving, how she'd begun taking the subway without complaint, even making jokes about the colorful characters they encountered. She'd even found a job as an assistant curator at a small gallery in Chelsea, something she'd never considered necessary before. One evening, as they sat on their small balcony drinking cheap wine from paper cups, Sophia surprised him. "You know, I never told you this, but growing up, we didn't have much. Dad worked 2 jobs, Mom cleaned houses. I swore I'd never live like that again." She took a sip of wine. "I thought losing everything would break me, but honestly, there's something freeing about it." Marcus felt a twinge of guilt, but before he could respond, Sophia continued. "I was so caught up in proving I belonged in your world that I lost myself. All those people I thought were my friends. They disappeared the moment our fortune did. But you're still you, still the man I fell in love with at that gallery opening, when you spent 2 hours debating abstract expressionism with me instead of networking like everyone else." The guilt in Marcus's stomach grew heavier. He watched as Sophia adapted to their new reality with increasing grace. She started volunteering at a community art program for underprivileged kids, pouring her passion for art into something meaningful rather than just collecting expensive pieces. She reconnected with old friends from her pre-wealth days, hosting dinner parties in their modest apartment that were filled with more genuine laughter than any of their formal galas had ever been. 6 months into the bankruptcy, Sophia came home bursting with excitement. "I just sold my first piece as a curator. It's not much commission, but it's something I did on my own." Her eyes sparkled with a pride he'd never seen when she was simply spending his money. That night, Sophia curled up next to him on their worn couch, her head on his shoulder. "You know what's strange? I actually feel more secure now than I did when we were rich. Back then, I was always worried about measuring up, about maintaining an image. Now, I know we can survive anything as long as we're together." Marcus's heart clenched. The deception he'd orchestrated to test her loyalty had revealed something far more complex than he'd anticipated. Yes, Sophia had married him partly for his wealth and the lifestyle he could provide. She'd admitted as much. But beneath the designer labels and social climbing had been a woman capable of tremendous growth and adaptation. The question now wasn't whether Sophia would stay with him, despite losing their fortune. She'd proven she would. The question was whether she could forgive him for doubting her enough to orchestrate this elaborate deception. As he held her that evening, listening to her make plans for the community art program's upcoming exhibition, Marcus realized he had severely underestimated the woman he'd married. What he didn't know was that Sophia had been harboring secrets of her own. Earlier that week, she'd received an interesting phone call from one of Marcus's former business partners, someone who had recognized her at the gallery. The conversation had left her with suspicions about their sudden fall from grace, suspicions she was carefully keeping to herself while conducting her own quiet investigation. While Marcus wrestled with his growing guilt, Sophia's suspicions continued to deepen. Her conversation with James Wheeler, Marcus's former partner from his startup days, had planted a seed of doubt that she couldn't ignore. "The timing doesn't add up," James had told her during their chance meeting at the gallery. "A hack of that magnitude would have left digital fingerprints everywhere. And Marcus, he's always been 3 steps ahead when it comes to cybersecurity. Something doesn't smell right." Sophia began paying closer attention to the subtle details she'd overlooked in their dramatic downfall. She noticed how Marcus's stress seemed to evaporate during certain private moments, only to return when they were in public. How some of his emergency business calls happened at surprisingly convenient times. How, despite their supposed financial ruin, certain basic expenses never seemed to be an issue. But instead of confronting him, Sophia decided to play along. If Marcus was testing her, she would turn the tables and test him right back. She doubled down on her transformation, not because she was being watched, but because she had discovered something genuine in this simpler life they now led. One rainy Tuesday evening, Sophia invited Marcus to the community center where she volunteered. The children were putting on an art show, displaying paintings they'd created under her guidance. As they walked through the makeshift gallery spaces set up in the gymnasium, Sophia watched Marcus's face carefully. "This one's by Maria. she explained, stopping in front of a vibrant abstract painting. She's 9 and hasn't spoken since her mother passed away last year. But look at how she communicates through color. The canvas exploded with deep blues and fierce reds, pain and hope intertwined in each brushstroke. Marcus stood transfixed, and Sophia saw something shift in his expression. Genuine emotion breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "It's extraordinary," he whispered, and she knew he meant it. That night, Sophia made a decision. She would continue gathering evidence of Marcus's deception, but not to expose him. Instead, she would use this opportunity to show him exactly who she was, who she'd always been beneath the glossy exterior he'd apparently doubted so much. She took on more responsibilities at the gallery, not just because she needed the work, but because she genuinely loved discovering new artists and helping them find their audience. She started a weekly art therapy program for kids from the local homeless shelter, using her connections from her socialite days to secure donations of art supplies. Meanwhile, she began keeping a detailed journal of all the inconsistencies she noticed in their supposed financial ruin. The way certain premium subscriptions never got canceled, how their health insurance remained surprisingly comprehensive for a couple in bankruptcy, the mysterious way their refrigerator had been immediately replaced when it broke down, despite their supposed penny pinching. One evening, while Marcus was in the shower, Sophia received a text from James Wheeler. "Found something interesting in the SEC filings. Call me." She deleted the message immediately, her heart racing. The game was becoming more complex, the stakes higher than either of them realized. As she heard the shower turn off, Sophia quickly busied herself with preparing dinner, a skill she'd genuinely come to enjoy. She was making Marcus's favorite pasta dish, one her grandmother had taught her long before she'd ever dreamed of marrying a billionaire. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd never cooked it for him during their wealthy days, too busy with catered dinners and restaurant reservations. "Something smells amazing," Marcus said, emerging from the bathroom. Sophia noticed how he'd switched from his designer loungewear to simple sweats, another calculated detail in his elaborate production. "Just like my abuela used to make," she replied, stirring the sauce. "You know, she always said rich people don't know how to enjoy food properly, too busy showing off their expensive wine collections to appreciate a simple meal made with love." She watched Marcus's reaction in the reflection of the kitchen window, saw the slight flinch he tried to hide. "Interesting. Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said, coming up behind her to kiss her neck. The gesture was familiar, loving, and Sophia allowed herself to lean into it, despite knowing it was part of his test. Because test or no test, she had realized something profound during these months of pretend poverty. She did love him, perhaps more genuinely now than ever before, but love didn't mean she would let him off the hook easily, not when he'd orchestrated such an elaborate scheme to test her loyalty. No, Sophia had a different plan in mind. She would let this play out, gathering her evidence, building her case, and when the moment was right, she would reveal not just that she knew about his deception, but that she had used it to show him exactly who she really was, for better or worse. As they sat down to dinner, Sophia raised her paper cup of wine, a detail she found particularly amusing in Marcus's commitment to their fictional poverty. "To simple pleasures," she toasted, meeting his eyes with a warmth that was genuine, even as she noted the flicker of guilt that crossed his face. "To simple pleasures," he echoed, and Sophia hid her smile behind her cup. Little did Marcus know, but his elaborate test was about to become far more complicated than he'd ever anticipated. The following week, Sophia set her own plan in motion. She'd received more intriguing information from James Wheeler, documentation showing that Blackwood Enterprises subsidiaries were still very much operational, just carefully hidden under layers of shell companies. But instead of using this information to confront Marcus, she decided to orchestrate her own subtle revenge. She began by suggesting they rent out their spare bedroom to help with expenses. "The extra income would help," she said innocently over breakfast, watching Marcus nearly choke on his coffee. "I know this lovely grad student from the gallery who's looking for a place." Marcus, trapped by his own deception, couldn't come up with a reasonable objection. A week later, Emma Chen moved in, coincidentally Richard Chen's niece, though Sophia pretended not to make the connection. She'd chosen Emma carefully, knowing the young woman's presence would make it harder for Marcus and Richard to discuss their scheme freely in the apartment. Sophia also started bringing home takeout from an expensive sushi restaurant once a week, claiming it was the restaurant owner's way of thanking her for helping his daughter in the community art program. In reality, she was paying for it herself with the money she'd secretly kept aside from selling her designer clothes, another detail she knew Marcus couldn't question without revealing his own deception. "You know," she said one evening, delicately picking up a piece of otoro with her chopsticks, "it's amazing how generous people can be when you're down on your luck. It's like the universe is teaching us that true wealth isn't about money at all." She watched Marcus squirm slightly, noting how he seemed to be wrestling with increasing guilt. Good. But Sophia's masterpiece of counter-deception came in the form of a letter she deliberately left visible on their coffee table. It was from a prestigious art gallery in London, offering her a curator position with a salary that could comfortably support them both. She had actually received the offer, though she had no intention of accepting it. The letter served a different purpose. "I haven't decided yet," she told Marcus when he found it, his face pale. "It would mean moving to London, starting fresh. Maybe that's what we need." The panic in Marcus's eyes was barely concealed. Moving to London would disrupt his entire charade, force him to either maintain the deception internationally or reveal the truth. Sophia watched him struggle to find a way to discourage her without seeming unsupportive. "But what about your community art program?" he asked finally. "The kids need you here." Sophia felt a genuine warm rush of affection, despite her planned manipulation. He knew her well enough to know exactly what would give her pause. "You're right," she sighed. "I can't leave them, but we need to think about our future, Marcus. We can't live in limbo forever." Meanwhile, she continued gathering evidence of Marcus's deception, aided unknowingly by their new roommate Emma, who had a habit of leaving her laptop open while working on her finance thesis. Sophia occasionally glimpsed familiar company names and numbers scrolling across the screen, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. But what Sophia hadn't anticipated was how her own feelings would evolve during this elaborate dance of mutual deception. The more she pretended to be the devoted wife learning to live without wealth, the more she actually became that person. The community art program wasn't just a cover story anymore. It had become her passion, the simple dinners at home, the late-night conversations without the distraction of social obligations, the genuine connections she'd made in their new neighborhood. All of it felt more real than her previous life of luxury. One evening, as they walked home from the subway after a free concert in the park, Sophia found herself studying Marcus's profile in the fading light. He was still handsome, still the man she'd fallen in love with, but something had changed. The protective walls they'd both built, his with wealth, hers with social climbing, had crumbled, leaving something more genuine in their place. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, catching her staring. Sophia squeezed his hand. "Just thinking about how sometimes losing everything helps you find what's really important." The flash of guilt in his eyes was unmistakable, and Sophia felt her own pang of conscience about her counter-deception. They were both caught in an elaborate web of lies, each thinking they were testing the other, each discovering uncomfortable truths about themselves in the process. As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, the elevator was broken, another detail in Marcus's production that Sophia had noted. She wondered how much longer this game could continue. The evidence she'd gathered was substantial enough to confront him, but something held her back. Perhaps she was waiting for him to break first, to trust her enough to confess. Or perhaps she was afraid that bringing their mutual deception into the light would shatter this new reality they'd built, a reality that, despite being founded on lies, somehow felt more authentic than their previous life. Little did Sophia know, but events were about to unfold that would force both their hands. A chance encounter at the community center the next day would set in motion a chain of events that neither of them could have anticipated. The following day at the community center, Sophia was setting up for her afternoon art class when she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. "I thought I recognized you from the papers," said Caroline Whitman, one of her former socialite friends who had quickly disappeared after their supposed bankruptcy. But instead of the expected condescension, Caroline's voice held a strange note of conspiracy. "I've just had the most fascinating conversation with my husband's banking colleague," Caroline continued, lowering her voice. "It seems Blackwood Enterprises' overseas accounts are remarkably healthy for a company in ruins." Sophia's heart raced, but years of social training kept her face neutral. "Caroline, what a surprise. Are you here to donate to our program?" "Oh, darling, let's not play games. Thomas and I know what Marcus is doing. Testing you, isn't he? Richard Chen's been sloppy with the paperwork." Caroline's perfectly painted lips curved into a predatory smile. "The question is, what's it worth to you to keep this information private?" The threat was clear, but instead of panic, Sophia felt an odd sense of calm. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, though not quite how she'd imagined it. Caroline's attempted blackmail was about to become a crucial piece in her own elaborate game. "Why don't we discuss this over coffee?" Sophia suggested pleasantly. "I know a lovely little place around the corner." Over the next hour, Sophia carefully fed Caroline a mix of truth and carefully crafted misinformation. She admitted to suspecting Marcus's test, but painted herself as the naive, devoted wife determined to prove her love. She watched Caroline's eyes gleam with malicious delight, knowing the socialite would spread this version of events through their former social circle like wildfire. What Caroline didn't realize was that Sophia had recorded their entire conversation on her phone. One more piece of evidence, one more card to play in the increasingly complex game she and Marcus were engaged in. That evening, Sophia noticed Marcus was particularly distracted during dinner. His phone kept buzzing with messages he was trying to discreetly check. She suspected Caroline's gossip was already making the rounds, forcing Marcus to do damage control. "Rough day at work?" she asked innocently, passing him a bowl of her homemade soup. "Just some unexpected complications," he muttered, then attempted to change the subject. "How was your day at the community center?" "Oh, interesting," Sophia replied lightly. "I had an unexpected visitor. You remember Caroline Whitman?" Marcus's spoon clattered against his bowl. "Caroline? What did she want?" "To donate to the program, supposedly." Sophia watched him carefully. "She seemed very interested in how we're managing since the bankruptcy." The color drained from Marcus's face, and Sophia could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to calculate how much damage control would be needed. She decided to twist the knife just a little further. "You know, it's strange," she mused, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "Caroline mentioned something about overseas accounts. I didn't really understand it all. You know how bad I am with financial matters." She gave a self-deprecating laugh that she knew he would remember from their early dating days. "But she seemed to think our situation might not be as dire as it appears." Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "People love to gossip," he said carefully, "especially when they see others in difficulty." Sophia nodded. "I suppose you're right, though it did remind me of something James Wheeler mentioned when I ran into him last month." She let the sentence hang in the air, heavy with implication. The sound of Marcus's phone buzzing again broke the tension, and he excused himself to take the call in their bedroom. Through the thin walls, Sophia could hear his urgent whispers, though not the exact words. Emma chose that moment to emerge from her room. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at the closed bedroom door. "Uncle Richard's been acting weird lately, too. Family dinner last night was super tense." Sophia smiled warmly at their young roommate. "Everything's fine, Emma. Just some business complications. How's your thesis coming along?" As Emma launched into an explanation of her research into corporate financial structures, Sophia could hear Marcus's voice rising slightly in the bedroom. She caught phrases like damage control and stick to the plan, and had to suppress a smile. The game was approaching its endgame, but Sophia still wasn't sure how she wanted it to play out. She had enough evidence now to expose Marcus's deception, but doing so would mean admitting to her own counter-investigation. More importantly, it would mean confronting what their mutual deception said about their relationship. As she lay in bed that night, listening to Marcus's irregular breathing that told her he was still awake, Sophia contemplated her next move. Caroline's attempted blackmail had accelerated the timeline, but perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. Sometimes pressure was needed to reveal true character. Isn't that what Marcus had been trying to prove all along? What neither of them realized was that Emma had overheard more than she let on, and the young finance student was putting together her own conclusions about the strange dynamics playing out in their apartment. Her thesis research had given her access to certain databases, and her uncle's recent suspicious behavior had piqued her curiosity. Unknown to both Marcus and Sophia, Emma was about to unwittingly introduce a wild card into their carefully orchestrated game of deception. The next morning, Emma casually mentioned over breakfast that she was doing a case study on market manipulation and corporate restructuring for her thesis. "It's fascinating how companies can hide their assets in plain sight," she said, watching both Marcus and Sophia from behind her coffee mug. "Sometimes what looks like a bankruptcy is actually a brilliant strategic move." Marcus nearly choked on his toast, while Sophia maintained her perfect composure, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly around her coffee cup. Emma continued, seemingly oblivious to their reactions. "My professor actually mentioned Blackwood Enterprises as an interesting example of—" She paused, tapping her spoon thoughtfully against her mug. "What did he call it? Contemporary corporate theater?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's phone chose that moment to ring, and he practically fled to answer it, leaving Sophia and Emma alone in the kitchen. "You know," Emma said quietly once Marcus was out of earshot, "my Uncle Richard talks in his sleep during our weekly family dinners. He dozes off on the couch and says the most interesting things." Sophia met the young woman's knowing gaze. "Does he now?" "Mm-hmm. Last week he kept mumbling about Marcus's loyalty test and Sophia's surprising resilience. Quite the storyteller, my uncle." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Darling, we need to talk. The stakes have changed. Lunch today, Le Petit Bistrot, 1 p.m. Sophia showed up at the bistro exactly 15 minutes late. Enough to establish dominance, but not enough to be truly rude. Caroline was already on her second glass of wine. "The Whitman Group is preparing to launch a hostile takeover of Blackwood Enterprises," Caroline announced without preamble. "Thomas thinks the company is vulnerable right now, with all the rumors about bankruptcy. If you confirm these rumors are false, if you provide proof of Marcus's deception, the Whitmans will make it worth your while." Sophia took a deliberate sip of water. "And if I don't?" "Then we expose the truth anyway, but as a scandal rather than a strategic move. Marcus's reputation would never recover." Caroline leaned forward. "Think about it. Revenge for his little test, plus a very generous compensation package." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus was having an equally uncomfortable lunch with Richard Chen. "She knows," Richard said, pushing his untouched salad around his plate. "My niece overheard me talking about the plan and, well, Sophia's smarter than we gave her credit for." "How much does she know?" "Everything, probably. Emma says she's been gathering evidence for months, and now the Whitmans are circling." Richard looked up from his salad. "You need to end this, Marcus, before it spirals completely out of control." Back at the bistro, Sophia was delivering her response to Caroline's offer. "That's a very interesting proposition," she said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "But you've made one crucial mistake." "Oh?" Caroline's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "You assumed I'd want revenge." Sophia stood up, dropping a $100 bill on the table. "Consider this a thank you for clarifying where everyone's loyalties truly lie." As Sophia walked out of the restaurant, her phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "Uncle Richard just called. Marcus knows that you know. He's planning something big for tonight." Sophia allowed herself a small smile as she headed toward the community center. She had built something real there, something that had nothing to do with Marcus's money, or his test, or any of the games they'd been playing. The children's art program was flourishing, and she just received news that several pieces from their recent exhibition had sold for impressive prices. Money that would go directly to supporting the children's families. As she worked with the kids that afternoon, helping a young boy named Miguel perfect his brush technique, Sophia felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened tonight, she knew who she was now. The question was, did Marcus know who he was? And more importantly, did he know who they could be together once all the deceptions were stripped away? The sun was setting as Sophia headed home, the golden light painting Brooklyn's brownstones in warm hues. She could see lights on in their apartment window and Marcus's silhouette pacing back and forth. The moment of truth was approaching, but whose truth would it be? As she climbed the stairs, Sophia thought about the evidence file hidden in her gallery office, the recordings of Caroline's attempted blackmail, Emma's thesis research, and all the other pieces she'd gathered. But she also thought about the simple dinners they'd shared, the genuine laughs, the way Marcus's eyes softened when he watched her work with the kids at the community center. Her hand paused on the doorknob. Through the door, she could hear Marcus practicing what seemed to be a speech. The words were muffled, but his agitation was clear. Sophia took a deep breath and turned the handle, ready to face whatever came next. What she saw when she opened the door, however, was nothing she could have prepared for. The apartment was filled with flickering candlelight, and in the center of their modest living room stood Marcus, still in his work clothes but looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. On their small dining table was a simple home-cooked meal, his first attempt at cooking, judging by the slightly charred smell in the air. "I tried to make your grandmother's pasta recipe," he said quietly. "It's terrible." Sophia set her bag down slowly, taking in the scene. There were papers spread across the coffee table, bank statements, company documents, emails, all the evidence of his deception laid bare. "Before you say anything," Marcus held up his hand, "you should know that Caroline Whitman called me right after your lunch. She told me about their takeover plans and about the offer they made you." He swallowed hard. "She also told me you turned them down." "Did that surprise you?" Sophia asked, remaining by the door. "Everything about you surprises me," he admitted. "I thought I was testing your loyalty, but somewhere along the way, you became someone I didn't expect, someone better than the woman I thought I'd married, someone better than the man I've been." "And who have you been, Marcus?" Sophia moved further into the room, picking up one of the documents. "A husband who didn't trust his wife? A man so afraid of being loved for his money that he created an elaborate scheme to test that love?" "I was wrong," Marcus said simply. "But not just about you. I was wrong about what matters. These past months, watching you build something real at that community center, seeing how you've touched those children's lives, I realized I've spent years measuring success in dollars and cents, when real wealth was something entirely different." Sophia picked up another document. A familiar letterhead caught her eye. "The London Gallery offer is genuine," Marcus nodded. "And you should take it if that's what you want. No more tests, no more deceptions. I'll come clean about everything, to the press, to our friends, to everyone. And if you want to leave after that, I'll understand." Sophia moved to the table, examining his attempt at her grandmother's pasta. The sauce was separated, the pasta overcooked, but he'd tried, just like she'd tried to be the perfect socialite wife before all this began. "You know what's ironic?" she said, picking up a fork. "Your test revealed things about me that I never knew myself. I thought I needed the luxury, the social status, all of it. Turns out, I needed something real, something meaningful." She took a bite of the pasta and couldn't help but smile. "This is awful." "I know," Marcus laughed, then grew serious again. "Sophia, there's something else you should know. The Whitman Group's takeover attempt. It's not just about us. They're trying to gain control of a new security algorithm we've been developing. If they succeed, thousands of people could lose their jobs. I need to stop them, but I can't do it alone." Sophia set down her fork. "So that's why Caroline was so insistent. But why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm done with secrets." Marcus moved closer to her. "And because I need my wife, my real wife, the brilliant, compassionate woman who built an art program from nothing, who sees value in people that others overlook. I need her as a partner, not as a trophy or a test subject." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. "Uncle Richard just sent this. You both need to see it now." Attached was a document that made Sophia's blood run cold. The Whitmans' takeover plan wasn't just about Blackwood Enterprises. It was about the community center, too. They planned to demolish it for a luxury development project. "Marcus," Sophia held out her phone, her hand shaking slightly. "I think it's time we stopped testing each other and started working together." Marcus read the message, his expression hardening. "Those children's lives, their art, everything you've built." "Everything we could build," Sophia corrected him. She reached into her bag and pulled out her own file of evidence, not just about Marcus's deception, but about the Whitmans' various dealings over the years. "I wasn't just gathering proof of your test, darling. I've been keeping tabs on all our old friends." Marcus stared at the file, then at his wife, seeing her perhaps for the first time, not as the social climber he'd married, not as the devoted wife she'd proven to be, but as something entirely new, a true partner. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "shall we show them how the new Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood handle things?" Sophia matched his smile, but held up a finger. "First, we order real food, then we plan. And Marcus," she gestured at the burnt pasta, "leave the cooking to me." As they sat amid the candlelight and scattered documents, plotting their counter-move against the Whitmans, both realized that something fundamental had shifted. The games and tests were over. What remained was something far more valuable and far more dangerous to their enemies. Over Chinese takeout, Marcus and Sophia began piecing together their strategy. Emma joined them, bringing her laptop and thesis research that had inadvertently uncovered a pattern in the Whitmans' previous hostile takeovers. They always target companies during apparent vulnerability, Emma explained, pulling up a spreadsheet. But what's interesting is their real estate subsidiary. Every single company they have acquired had valuable property holdings that were later redeveloped, usually displacing community organizations in the process. The community center isn't just collateral damage, Sophia realized. It's part of their actual target. Marcus nodded grimly. The land value in that neighborhood has skyrocketed since your program started attracting positive attention. Classic gentrification play. But here's where it gets interesting, Emma continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Their previous projects all faced mysterious delays and complications. Required permits would go missing, community protests would spring up overnight, negative press would emerge about environmental impacts. Richard, Marcus smiled, he's been sabotaging them from the inside. That's why he was so insistent on keeping our test contained. He knew they were watching for any sign of weakness. Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. We have 48 hours before their board meets to approve the takeover bid. I still have friends at every major gallery in the city. One call, and we could have an emergency exhibition of the children's artwork, draw attention to what the community would lose. Better yet, Marcus leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with the same intensity that had built his empire. What if we don't just defend? What if we attack? He grabbed a napkin and began sketching out a plan. The Whitmans had overplayed their hand by threatening the community center. Every previous development project had followed the same pattern. They'd used their media connections to paint the existing community organizations as failing or mismanaged, justifying their demolition. But they can't do that here, Sophia caught on. The children's artwork is selling. We're getting grants. The program is demonstrably successful. Exactly, Marcus tapped the napkin. And Caroline gave us the perfect opening when she tried to blackmail you. If the press got wind of how they tried to manipulate a beloved community art program for corporate gain. My thesis, Emma interrupted, her eyes wide. What if it wasn't just about market manipulation in general? What if I focused specifically on analyzing the pattern of the Whitmans' takeovers? Pure academic research, of course. But if it happened to be published right before their board meeting? Sophia reached for her own phone again, this time pulling up the recording of her conversation with Caroline. And if this somehow leaked to their investors, along with documentation of their previous community redevelopment projects? They worked late into the night, ordering more coffee when the takeout ran out. Marcus contacted his board members, preparing them for the counterattack. Sophia reached out to her gallery connections, organizing an emergency exhibition titled Community Under Siege, Art in the Age of Corporate Greed. Emma fine-tuned her thesis, backed by years of financial data that Richard had helped her accidentally discover. Around 3 a.m, as they were finalizing the details, Sophia noticed Marcus watching her with an odd expression. What? She asked, self-consciously pushing her hair back from her face. I was just thinking, he said softly, about how I spent millions on corporate strategies over the years, and none of my high-paid consultants ever came up with something this brilliant. Sophia smiled, remembering the socialite she'd been just months ago, more concerned with designer labels than the corporate takeovers. Well, I spent years studying how to manipulate social circles to climb the ladder. Turns out those skills have better uses. Emma cleared her throat. Guys? You might want to see this. Caroline just posted something on Instagram. They crowded around her phone. There was Caroline, clearly tipsy, at some late-night club gathering, ranting on her stories about fake bankruptcies and hostile takeovers, and showing those Blackwoods what real power looks like. She's spiraling, Sophia observed clinically. The failed blackmail attempt hurt her ego more than we thought. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. Richard needs to see this. Caroline just gave us the perfect press narrative, the bitter socialite trying to destroy a children's art program out of spite. As dawn broke over Brooklyn, their counterattack was ready. But as Sophia watched the sunrise from their modest apartment window, she felt a moment of doubt. "Marcus," she said quietly, not turning around, "after this is over, what happens to us? To this life we've built here?" She heard him step up behind her, felt his arms wrap around her waist. "That depends," he said, "on whether you meant what you said about preferring something real to something luxurious." Sophia leaned back against him, watching the city wake up. In a few hours, they would launch their plan to save both the company and the community center. But first, she had a question of her own. "Do you trust me now?" she asked, turning in his arms to face him. "Really trust me, not just as your wife or a corporate asset, but as your equal?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the early morning light. "I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone," he finally said, "and I'm sorry it took all this to see who you really are." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of calculated moves and counter-moves. Emma's thesis was fast-tracked for publication, its meticulous documentation of the Whitmans' predatory practices catching the attention of financial journalists. Sophia's emergency exhibition opened to massive media coverage, the children's artwork and their stories putting a human face on corporate greed. Caroline's drunken Instagram rant went viral, picked up by news outlets as evidence of the privileged elite's disdain for community programs. The Whitman Group never stood a chance. By the time their board met to vote on the takeover bid, 3 major investors had already pulled out, spooked by the negative publicity and Emma's damning research. Caroline and Thomas Whitman were forced to resign to contain the damage, their reputation in tatters. In the aftermath, Marcus called a press conference. Standing beside Sophia at the podium, he announced that Blackwood Enterprises was not only solvent, but launching a new charitable foundation focused on arts education and community development. The bankruptcy had been a strategic restructuring, he explained, designed to streamline operations and refocus the company's priorities. "Sometimes," he said, looking at Sophia, "you have to lose everything to understand what really matters." The press ate it up, the power couple who had emerged stronger from adversity, the triumph of community values over corporate greed. But the real victory came later that evening, when they returned to the community center for the regular Wednesday art class. "Are we moving back to the penthouse?" Sophia asked as they watched Miguel, now one of their most promising young artists, work on his latest painting. Marcus squeezed her hand. "I was thinking we could keep the Brooklyn apartment, for when we need to remember what's real." 6 months later, Sophia sat in her new office at the Blackwood Community Arts Foundation, reviewing applications for their expanded youth program. They had branches opening in 3 other cities, with plans for nationwide expansion. The London Gallery had been disappointed by her refusal, but Sophia had found her true calling. Emma had graduated with honors, her thesis earning her job offers from top financial watchdog organizations. She still lived in their Brooklyn apartment, now running the foundation's financial literacy program for local youth. As for Marcus and Sophia's marriage, the testing was over, replaced by something far more valuable: partnership. They split their time between the penthouse and the Brooklyn apartment, hosting charity galas one night and helping with homework at the community center the next. "You know," Marcus said one evening as they walked home from the subway, taking the long way through their old neighborhood, "I never did tell you when I first realized my test had backfired." "Oh?" Sophia linked her arm through his, enjoying the cool autumn air. "It was that night you made your grandmother's pasta. You looked so happy, so genuinely content, and I realized I'd never seen that expression when we were living the high life. That's when I knew I wasn't testing your loyalty to our lifestyle. I was testing your ability to find happiness without it. And you didn't just find it, you created it, and then you shared it with others." Sophia stopped walking, turning to face him. "And what about you? When did you stop playing the bankrupt businessman and start becoming someone new yourself?" Marcus smiled, pulling her close. "The first time I saw you teaching those kids about art, you weren't just showing them how to paint. You were showing them how to see beauty in unexpected places. That's when I realized how blind I'd been, measuring everything in dollars and cents." They stood there for a moment, the Brooklyn street quiet around them. They had both lost something in this elaborate game of deception, their illusions, their pretenses, their carefully constructed facades. But what they had found was worth so much more: truth, purpose, and a love that had been tested not by the loss of wealth, but by the discovery of what truly mattered. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked. Sophia smiled, knowing he meant their Brooklyn apartment, not the penthouse. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." In the end, the rich husband who had faked bankruptcy to test his wife's loyalty had discovered a fundamental truth. Real wealth couldn't be measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It was measured in trust, in purpose, and in the ability to see value in the most unexpected places. And Sophia, the wife who had once married for security and status, had found something far more precious: the confidence to be herself and the power to make a real difference in the world. Their story became a different kind of society tale, not about wealth and status, but about finding authentic purpose and genuine love in the midst of deception. And in their Brooklyn apartment, kept as a reminder of what they had discovered during their elaborate game of testing each other, they had found what both had been searching for all along: a truth worth more than all their riches combined.